Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet, and welcome to my post-race reaction for the Australian or Albert Park GP race. What was your thoughts on this race? Did it make it really exciting that Red Bull didn't win a race? Or was it kind of dull because you were thinking that you were going to have more action at the front with Verstappen and Sainz going at it from the very beginning? And with all the other things going on in this race, with Logan Sargent not participating, were you expecting more or less? Please keep your comments below. I would appreciate that. As for me, I thought it was probably a decent race. Probably like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 is probably what I'm ranking it as. It had a little bit of intrigue with the pit stop strategy at the second pit stop to try to figure out where drivers are going to end up for the last stint of the race. And then, of course, with that wrecks and reliability issues throughout the vehicles, it kind of gave a little bit of extra spin on it. Even though we didn't have a lot of passing or, really struggles to get to that first position, the second and through fourth or fifth, and then of course you had the back of the pack, kind of made up for it in my view for just a generally good race. But what was your thoughts on this race? As normal, I go through the drivers from last to first and kind of give you my thoughts on them and how they did in the race, and potentially have what happened to them if something that I know has happened to them that caused them to end up in that position that they are in. And so without further ado, we will start off here. And Logan Sargent, who did not start the race because an FP1, his teammate, Alex Albon, crashed his car. And so then he decided that they could not repair that car, had enough damage to the actual chassis part of that vehicle, and they didn't have a spare chassis. They went ahead and let Logan Sargent run in free practice 2, which I thought was kind of odd unless it took them that long to figure out that they couldn't repair that car, or maybe it took too long to swap out parts for Alex Albon to take over that chassis for Logan. But anyway, the next day they made the announcement that Alex Albon was taking over the chassis from Logan Sargent and letting him run in free practice 3 and qualifying throughout the race, as they figured that Alex would have the best chance to get points in this race when it's known to be kind of a up in the air, potentially get that extra point, which it turned out again this year. We had some turmoil, so that let those back in teams to have a chance at those last couple of points. So that's why Logan did not even start this race. Now we come to the big surprise of the weekend, with Max Verstappen not finishing the race. We basically have him going around, had a good start of the race, kept ahead of Sainz to keep that first position. He did lose that first position on that second lap to him, but it's probably due to him having some brake issues that kind of ended up overheating and exploding those brakes on lap 3 as he was pulling into the pits to get that looked at, which basically shot his whole day. So he ended up, from first all the way down to that last position of 19th with a DNF. Then we have Lewis Hamilton, who was not doing the greatest. He was really struggling in that Mercedes compared to his teammate at that point in time. But he did have a good start, passing Albon on the start. And then on lap 17 is when he actually had a engine failure. And so that caused a virtual safety car. And that was actually after a quick pit stop on lap 8 that switched him from softs to hards. And he was one of the few people to start off the race in softs, trying to gain those positions at the very beginning, switching over to the hards, and then his engine just kind of let go. You could hear it just die completely. And then he was coasting off to the side, and then ended up having a virtual safety car for him, pulling off to the side to get that vehicle off the track or off the racing potential line of crashes. So that kind of caused some other people to do some pit stops at that time. But going from 11th on the grid to 18th was not his day. And he was doing a decent job, even though he wasn't quite up there with his teammate George at the time. So that kind of lays that out. And then we come to the double DNF of Mercedes with George Russell at the very end of the race. He was doing fairly good. He did gain a position at the start as well. He passed Sergio Perez, I believe, on the start, and then he boxed on lap 9 from mediums to hards, and then again on lap 46, switching to another set of hards. And he was catching up to Fernando Alonso, doing a fairly good job, thinking that he was able to potentially move up in the field at that point in time, which would have been like 6th position. But due to some interesting circumstances that he kind of gained too much ground and lost too much downforce going around some corners, and then really lost his vehicle's ability to stay on the track, and kind of slid off the track and hit the wall, damaging that Mercedes fairly significantly and almost turning all the way over. He was on the side of the track, the side of the car in the middle of the track, which caused a nice safety car, or virtual safety car, to come out at the very end, ending the race under that VSC. But besides that, he was doing a decent job. Not the greatest job in the world, but a decent job from that Mercedes. I think they still have some work to do. For some reason, this weekend was not looking very good for that Mercedes compared to the last couple weekends where they knew they were struggling, but this one just seems to be more struggles for that Mercedes than normal. And then having a double DNF for this race really hurts that Mercedes team. Hopefully they can bounce back next week. Well, not next race, and so that they can actually put together and try to figure out exactly what happened to Lewis's car, so they don't have that potential risk in the future. And hopefully they can get some stuff sorted out for George Russell's car, so it's not going to be that much of an issue for him either. So that's why we have the two Mercedes that are in that back of the pack. And then we have Esteban Ocon. He was doing a decent job. Qualifying 15th was, not bad for that Alpine at this stage. We know that Alpine is kind of a horrible state, really heavy, really sluggish, not doing what it needs to be doing for an Alpine car. And I know both of those drivers are really struggling to see the positive in all of this. And I know they're trying to get some updates and trying to do some testing so that Alpine team can really understand how that car behaves, so they can get the right updates to that car, so that they can advance into at least to the mid part, that back pack of the field, and be competitive, try to get some points in that running. But to talking about Esteban Ocon itself, he ended up having a bad pit stop, or another pit stop, because of a tear off that got stuck in one of his vents, forcing him to come back in. So he boxed on lap 10 from a set of mediums to hards. And then 7 laps later, he had to box again, and stayed on a set of hard tires, but that cost him quite a bit of time during that point, trying to get the fish out that tear off out of that air vent. And then he pitted again on lap 44 for that last set. In generally, that's what kind of pushed him back into the back of the field. He was doing a pretty decent job in that Alpine before that, comparative, to what you would expect in that car this season. Hopefully they can figure out those details and get them up to speed with those updates here soon. So that's kind of what happened to Esteban Ocon, and that's why he was kind of at the actual last runner of this field. Juan Zhou qualified in 19th, started from the pit lane as they made some changes for his car, and then he ended up having a bad pit stop as well. They were having trouble with those guns and those lug nuts coming off of those vehicles, which is very strange. And I think for Juan Zhou, it wasn't actually that. It was that his engine cut off when he pitted, and he had to reboot his computer electronics while he was sitting in the pit stop so that he could get going. if I remember right. And so that's why he got pushed back to the back of the field. But he boxed on lap 7 from a soft set of tires to a hard set of tires, and then back on 36, he went to another set of hard tires. But at that point in time, he was running at the back of the field, kind of struggling, trying to figure out what he could do at that point. And then Valtteri Bottas, who qualified in 13th and ended up in 14th, he's the one that had the lug nut issue in the pit stops straight off the bat on lap 8, which pushed him back into the back of the field, and then he tried to pit on lap 38 for another set, but that didn't gain him the ground that he needed to really do very good in this race, even though he had a fairly decent start, passing Alex Albon on the start of the race. So that gives us to Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly started off in 17th, where he qualified, and ended up in 13th. So a decent race for him with all of the extra people, going out of this race and potential issues. He could have done a little bit better, except he ended up having a 5-second penalty for crossing the pit lane exit. I guess he mistook which line was the actual line for the pit lane exit, because this is a semi-street course. So we weren't sure if that was his vision in that car or if he was just getting confused on which line was what he was looking at. And I didn't get a clarification on that. But that's kind of the reason that he got pushed back, because of that 5-second penalty. And of course, he's also in that rough Rhine with that Alpine, which is kind of at the back of the field this season, at least the beginning of this season. So not too bad of a job for him, ending up in 13th. Hopefully they can get some good data from him, and as I said, and to kind of understand what they need to do and what updates they need to bring to that Alpine to make it a little bit more competitive. Then you have Daniel Ricciardo in the RB, who qualified in 18th and ended up in 12th. I don't have a whole lot of going on with him. I basically had him pit really early from on lap 4, switching from softs to hards. And then on lap 30, he switched to another set of hards and went long, trying to get that advantage. Hopefully, I think they were trying to hope for another safety car at the right point so they could kind of jump the field a little bit. Kind of struggling in this RB this time for Daniel compared to his teammate, who actually was decently in points. So I know this is hard for him, and I think he was trying to get an idea a little bit where he click with that RB. He's saying it's not that they don't understand the RB, it's just that he's having a little bit of struggles with it. So hopefully that grip for that RB, he can really snap to it and really understand exactly what he needs to do for that setup, so that he can get some more points and be a little bit more competitive, because as we all know, we have other people waiting in line for that RB. So who knows how that will end up throughout this season. Then we come to Alex Albon, who qualified in 12th and ended up in 11th. So Williams' bet did not pay off, hoping that Albon would be able to get into the points instead of leaving it to Sargent. So he was just outside of points in that 11th position. Kind of rough for Williams in this regard. And they put a lot of work to try to switch that car chassis over to him. He did a decent running, but not where they really needed to be. I think they lost a lot of input when he crashed in free practice 1, and switching those components over, don't always give the exact replica of what you would think they would do. So I think that was part of the issue with Williams ending up in the 11th position. This ends the bottom half of the field. Going to the top half, we have the two Haas's. So we have Kevin Magnussen, who qualified in 14th and ended up in 10th. He had a decent start, passing Albon on the start of the race. He boxed at lap 8 from mediums to hard tires. And then on 34, he went to another set of hard tires, and he was able to pass Albon again on lap 45 for the 11th position. And then when George Russell ended up crashing, he got bumped into that last point position of 10th, gaining double points for Haas, which is really good to see for Haas. I'm kind of leery how well Haas is going to do throughout the season. Even though they've done really good at the beginning of the season, they tend to fall off with other teams bringing updates and them having to struggle with those updates not in the season. They seem to do good, between seasons, knowing how to really dive into that car, but during the season, bringing updates as the season goes, they seem to struggle with. So I'm hoping they will have that more with them this season, that they can actually go through this race and season, bring updates and keep in that competitiveness as they have. But Kevin Magnussen was the last person to be lapped, so we have a lot of people to be lapped down in this race, but he was the last person in that field. Nico Hulkenberg qualified in 16th and ended up in 9th. He was doing a fairly good race, I think, comparatively. He passed Gasly on lap 12 for 7th. He passed K-Mag in a swap on lap 24 for that 11th position, as the tire strategy was a little bit different, and was able to just kind of keep that position and then work his way up to that 9th position as people pitted, and the people ended up crashing out in the front of the area, bumping them up into that 9th position, gaining points. And as we see, even though Haas has gained 3 points, they have actually went backwards in the constructor standings because of Yuki's Red RB, who gained 6 points this race, which is good to see for RB, but it's kind of disappointing on Haas's point of view, as they've actually made points and yet still going backwards. Now we come to Fernando Alonso, who qualified in 10th and ended up in 8th. He had not a great start, losing a position on the start of the race. He went long on both stints, so he boxed on lap 17 from a hards to a set of mediums, and then ran those mediums to lap 42 before switching back to a set of hards. I have him on lap 14 getting into second position because of pit stop strategies and of Norris and Perez dropping down the field. And then he ended up getting a penalty at the end of the race for causing the issue, I believe, with George Russell and having him crash, as he kind of let off on the throttle, trying to make it a whole bit harder for George Russell to pass him in some of those areas, trying to gain that gap so that he would actually have a better chance of keeping George behind him. And I think that we're thinking that was a little bit too much, and so they end up giving him a penalty. So even though he finished the race in 6th, they dropped him down to 8th position, which bumped a couple of people around in the final standings. So that's kind of what happened to Fernando Alonso, and I'd like to see a little bit more. It's hard for me as a layman in this race to see exactly what happened, but it was kind of that detail of him, kind of letting up, and I guess George Russell closing so quickly that it lost the downforce that he was expecting to get in those corners, and just having that Mercedes slide off in a dangerous way made it where they thought they had to give Fernando a penalty for that. Now we have a nice surprise for Yuki Tsunoda in that RB, qualifying in 8th and moving up to 7th. So a really good running for Yuki in that RB, even though he had a not so great of a start, losing a position at the very start of the race. He did pass Gasly on lap 41 for 9th, and basically kept a good, nice, clean race and working his way up to 7th eventually after some issues, and with Alonso dropping back a little bit farther in the grid as well. So he gained a position there as well. He did box on lap 10 and from mediums to hards, and then on 37 he went to another set of hards. Doing a really good job, I think, in that running. So Yuki was doing a really good job in this standing. Then we come to Lance Stroll, who did again, you don't see a whole lot of him, but he did a decent job. He gained a position at the start, passing Yuki Tsunoda. boxing lap 9 from mediums to hards, like most people, switching from mediums to hards. And then on lap 38, switched to another set of hards and just kind of kept it clean, kept it in line. I didn't see a whole lot from him other than that, and was able to make it up to 6th position. Sergio Perez had a couple of issues to start off with. He did have a 3-place grid penalty at the beginning for impeding a driver in qualifying. So that dropped him back from that 3rd position to the 6th position to start this race. And then once he got in that position, he really had a hard time gaining that much ground to kind of get into the front of the field. He did lose a spot at the very beginning of the race, but he was able to still pass Stroll on lap 19 for 7th, pass Russell on lap 21 for 6th, and to pass Alonso on lap 27 for 5th, where he ended up in that running. So really good job for Sergio, even though it doesn't look that way. I know that they were struggling from the beginning on that Red Bull, not quite to where they wanted it. So that kind of led to the semi-belief, which is hard to know, whether Verstappen would have taken that Red Bull to the end as easily as he would have in the first 2 races, or would he have had a little bit more battle for that first position if he was not able to drop out like he did because of that issue with the air duct and that brake catching on fire and exploding. So you can think what you want for Sergio, but I think he did a decent job, even though he didn't gain the ground that they were hoping for. He's kind of known for this in the past too, that once he gets in the back, it's kind of hard to him to get from that mid-pack section to that really front running unless something else happens. But I think he did a good job. He did pass a lot of folks in this race on track. So that says that he was actually, giving it his all and doing what he could, probably wearing those tires out a little bit more than he wanted to try to get around these people having that issue when he gets to those gaps in the front. So that's my view. If you have a different view or if you heard anything else, I'd appreciate that for Sergio Perez on that running. Then we have Oscar Piastri, who qualified in 5th and worked his way up to 4th. He did box on lap 14 from mediums to hards, and then 41 from hards to another set of hards, where he did lose that 2nd position to Leclerc when he... No, sorry, I'm in the wrong position. He boxed on lap 9 from mediums to hards, and lap 40 from hards to another set of hards. He did pass Gasly on lap 12 for 6th, and he did pass, get into the lead on that. Well, he got in 3rd as well. So he was doing a really good job and ended up having to swap positions with Lando Norris, as Lando had fresher sets of tires, and that pushed him from that 3rd position back to that 4th position. Being a good team player, trying to help out McLaren, trying to put pressure on Charles Leclerc, which didn't end up having I know they're gaining ground, but they're not quite enough that they could really put a lot of pressure due to the pit stop strategy that they were hoping to. They tried to, undercut him, and that didn't quite work out for them in the pit stop strategy. So now we have Lando, which I was on earlier, sorry about that, who boxed on lap 14 from mediums to hards and lap 41 from hards to another set of hards. He did lose that 2nd position to Charles Leclerc on that 2nd pit stop, thinking that they could retake that position with that fresher set of tires, which didn't turn quite out the way they were hoping to. And then he was swapped with Oscar Piastri on lap 29 for that 3rd position earlier on. So that kind of worked out more towards Lando's favor for the swap, even though he didn't quite get to where he wanted on Charles Leclerc. He said he thought they were faster, but then I laughed because he said, they couldn't gain the ground that was gained from Charles Leclerc, pitting. So that kind of put a contradiction in his statement there. But a good running for McLaren, coming in 3rd and 4th. And Lando ended up where he qualified from in that 3rd position, so that's good to see. them being able to put pressure on Ferrari and potentially Red Bull, but not more of the Ferraris in this kind of settings in this point in time. So hopefully they can bring up some updates and help be a little bit more competitive. And we'll have some more changes in those front running positions. This comes to position 2 with Charles Leclerc, qualifying in 4th and then ended up in 2nd. He ended up having the fastest lap as well, so that's good. And we basically see him passing Gasly on lap 12 for that 5th position, and then again got 2nd due to a Alonso pitting. And then, as far as I can tell, he actually got the fastest track record with that fastest lap, so I'll have to double check that, but that's from what I gathered. It looks like he now has the fastest lap in the race for this Australian GP circuit, which is good to see. But a really good race. He was just kind of a little bit behind. I know he was struggling on that first set of that stint on those medium tires, and then we switched to the hard tires for that second stint. He kind of had some graining in there as well that he went through. But that last set, he said he was really feeling it, but he just didn't have enough left in those time period to really gain ground and to really put pressure on his teammate throughout this. Which leads us to Carlos Sainz, who qualified in 2nd and ended up in 1st. I have him passing Verstappen on lap 2, on turn 9, on lap 2 for that 1st position. Now the question there was Verstappen already having issues with his brakes before that and making mistakes because of that? Because shortly after that he was saying his car was loose when he had some DRS trying to gain that position back, and then we saw the smoke coming out of Verstappen's car. So kind of the question there is that would we have as much of a competition between Carlos Sainz and Verstappen if Verstappen was able to stay in this race or not? Of course, that's all speculation, and we do actually have a non-Red Bull winner with that Ferrari of Carlos Sainz in this race. He was the driver of the day, of course, being out of surgery and being able to still race and win this GP circuit. He did box on lap 17 from mediums to set of hards, and then went till lap 41 for another set of hards. I have him with a 3.38 second lead on lap 10 and a 5.17 second lead on lap 29, and then which is about halfway. On lap 40, he had that 10.13 second lead, which gave him that ability to do that pit stop. And then on lap 50, he was 5.4 seconds lead. And then, of course, at the very end, he was 2.3 seconds ahead of his teammate, which is probably more due to the safety car, or the virtual safety car in that end running, keeping that distance gap between him and his teammate. But a really good run. Carlos Sainz kind of got it in the head and managed the laps, managed his tires, was able to keep that lead throughout the pit stop strategy, and ended up in first place. Big congratulations out to him and Ferrari for this, as they're gaining some ground on Red Bull, making this a little bit more interesting in the next couple of tracks to see if that's a fluke or if that's more of a running for the rest of the season. Doing a really good job, and of course, it's, you have the nice contrast for him being let go from Ferrari at the beginning of the season, with Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari, so they couldn't renew Carlos Sainz's contract. So he is open. So that's kind of an interesting dilemma that they put themselves in, with him winning again for Ferrari, but yet not being contracted next year for Ferrari. So we will see where Sainz ends up, and I'm sure he'll end up with a fairly decent team if he can make it decently throughout the rest of this season. So if you made it this far, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of content. And we will move on to driver standing. So Of course, we have Logan Sargent at the end, dropping back to that 21st position because he did not race in this circuit, being taken over by his teammate, his vehicle. Valtteri Bottas stays in that 20th position at the back of the pack. Pierre Gasly gets moved up to 19th. Esteban Ocon drops to 18th. Daniel Ricciardo, Juan Zhou, and Alex Albon still have 0 points but drop back a position due to point gatherers. Kevin Magnussen gains a point, making him bump up to 14th. Nico Hulkenberg, even though he gained points and now has 3, gets dropped down to 13th. Oliver Behrman drops down to 12th, not being able to participate due to Carlos Sainz being in that Ferrari now. And Yuki Tsunoda jumps up to 11th with his nice finish, gaining 6 points. And then, of course, with Lewis Hamilton dropping out of this race, he drops back into that 10th, with Lance Stroll jumping him into that 9th position. Fernando Alonso and George Russell dropping back a little bit, even though Fernando did gain a few points, gaining ground on George Russell. Lando Norris jumped up to 6th. Oscar Piastri stays in that 5th position. Carlos Sainz jumps back up in the grid after coming back and actually being able to participate in the Grand Prix, up to 4th with 40 points, just behind Sergio Perez in 46 points, dropping back from that 2nd position with Charles Leclerc gaining that 2nd position with 47 points. And even though Max did not be able to participate or gain points in this Grand Prix, he is still in the lead with 51. But that kind of narrows the gap between that 1st and 2nd position, so that'll put a little bit more pressure on him in Japan coming up. And where are the constructors? So we have Alpine still in the very back of the pack with 0 points. And then we have Stake, Kick, Sauber, and Williams, and with 0 points as well, dropping back. And then Haas, even though they gained points and up to 4, dropped back to 7th position because of RB being able to gain that 6 points up ahead. And then we have the same running, even though point spreads have narrowed down a little bit, with Aston Martin with 25, Mercedes with 26, so that's a nice competition there at this point. McLaren with 55, gaining that gap over Mercedes with that double DNF of Mercedes. And then we have Ferrari gaining ground on Red Bull with from 93 to Red Bull's 97. So that kind of gives you the idea of where the constructor stands right now. And we come to Japan in April 7th at Suzuka, one of the best races in my opinion. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this one. It is a 3.608 mile track. So we'll be running 53 laps for a total race distance of 191.054 miles. And currently the lap record is 1 minute 30 seconds.983. Sorry, 1 minute 30.983 seconds by Lewis Hamilton in 2019. And it was first introduced in 1987. So I look forward to seeing the Suzuka GP in a couple of weeks. I think it's one of the better races and tracks out there. It's going to be kind of hard to beat Australia, as they've come with this reliability issues and wrecks that we've seen. So we'll kind of have to touch base to see how they react in a couple of weeks' time with those issues that the teams have occurred, and if they can bounce back from those. So until then, I will see you on the grid, and farewell.